Welcome to the studio, I'm Katerina Nesterenko. Here's what we're talking about today. Ukraine's GUR strikes a military base of the occupiers. Putin's mobilization is a farce. They're sending even disabled people to the front. A night of hell, 500 drones and 40 missiles. Zelensky promises a tough response. Poland will shoot down Russian drones without regard for NATO. Sweden and Finland are preparing a strike brigade near Russia's borders. Lavrov is speaking in an empty UN hall while Russia's billions are being spent in Ukraine. North Korea is threatening us with new missiles. All this and more in just a few seconds. But right now, give this video a like and subscribe to the Ukraine Today channel so you don't get lost on YouTube. Well then, let's get started. In occupied Melitopol, the GUR carried out an operation on September 27th. An explosion thundered at a closed enemy military base in the area of the air town. As a result of a precise operation by drone operators, an Azbukan and at least 4 Russian soldiers were destroyed. But the enemy is not giving up. Ukraine's southern defense forces warn that the Russians are forming assault groups, moving them to forward positions and preparing a new offensive in the Dnipro and Kherson directions. They are rotating troops on the islands and using smoke for camouflage. The Kremlin is preparing to fight in a new way during the autumn-winter period. Meanwhile, even among the most ardent imperialists, the propaganda front is starting to crack. Even Strelkov-Gherkin, who is behind bars, is now writing that it's time to end the special military operation, saying that capturing Ukraine didn't work out and the war has lost its meaning.
I read Trump's latest statement, which was extremely harsh towards Russia, where he said that Ukraine could defeat Russia because Russia turned out to be a paper tiger, along with all his other epithets directed at us. And unfortunately, I can't help but agree with him on a number of points. Indeed, to fight for 3.5 years against a country that everyone expected would collapse in 3 days, or at least in 3 weeks, is quite something. Especially since no one expected this from a country with such enormous potential, such a long military history, significant military traditions, and a fairly large army. I still actively wonder whether anyone will ever be held accountable for the fact that we went to war with troops that were only good for parades, biathlon competitions, and park celebrations.
Meanwhile, Putin's mobilization has turned into a farce, and from the military base in Narofominsk near Moscow, they're sending even those with fitness categories B or D to the front. A guy with paralyzed arms, a man with a removed leg muscle who walks with a cane, a soldier with spinal implants, and even 53-year-old Sergei with liver cirrhosis. All of them have been deemed fit for service.
And
here's what Putin's own soldiers are actually saying about the reality at the front.
Out of my guys, not just from my platoon, but from the entire company I was assigned to, they're all tragically killed in action. No, wait, I must correct myself. 3 of them are wounded in action, very seriously wounded, with injuries that are life-threatening, yet absolutely no one comes to evacuate them from the battlefield. They are simply left there, abandoned, effectively sent to die a slow and painful death. If you get sick or contract any kind of illness, or if anything else happens to you that makes you unable to fight, they just send you off to a place where you are forgotten and left to perish. Our command does absolutely nothing. I've personally seen wounded individuals bleed out right in front of my very eyes, and tragically, no one ever evacuates them. They simply just die. I think I might actually have possibly developed this diabetes condition. I don't know what's happening to me. I feel weak. I can't go anywhere. I can only move about 100 meters at a time, and I keep some food with me just in case. I just don't know. They don't give us any water. Go on without water, guys just can't take it. They're dying of thirst. It's just a nightmare here. The attitude towards everything is just fucked up. They're commanding from their bunkers, sending the guys out as cannon fodder. All just to pin medals on themselves and get some kind of hero status.
It seems that for Russian commanders, the main thing is to send men to slaughter, just to prolong the war for Putin. If you agree, leave a like. The night of September 27th to 28th became a real hell for Ukraine. Russia unleashed a wave of terror on Ukrainian cities, and it lasted for more than 12 hours straight. President Volodymyr Zelensky reported nearly 500 attack drones and more than 40 missiles, including Kinzhal missiles. The remaining strikes targeted Kyiv and the region, Zaporizhia, Khmelnytsky, Sumy, Mykolaiv, Chernihiv and Odessa regions. Among the wounded and dead are children. Zelensky stated, "We will strike the Russian Federation in response to force Moscow to diplomacy." Meanwhile, in Moscow, the Kremlin's cynicism flows, as Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, responding to a question about a possible attack on the Kremlin, hinted at a nuclear strike.
And with each passing day, Ukraine's negotiating position is relentlessly deteriorating. And this is something they need to be fully aware of. I think internally they do realize it, but here they're bluffing. Unfortunately, they are not pursuing the path of seeking peaceful solutions to the conflict.
If any attempts are indeed made to attack the Kremlin, how exactly will we, as a global community, perceive that kind of aggressive action?
Listen, our Supreme Commander-in-Chief, the President, has already spoken on this topic. So it's better not to even talk about it. And
the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that they struck exclusively military targets. Moreover, the ministry boasts that all targets of the strikes were achieved. All designated targets were hit. I read the comments under previous episodes and see that many of you are watching us from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And now we continue. Up next is the most interesting part. Poland's Ministry of Defense is preparing a decision to shoot down Russian drones over Ukrainian territory, even without coordination with other NATO members. The recent attacks by Russian drones have been a cold shower for official Warsaw. Poland is becoming increasingly active in helping Ukraine and is distancing itself less and less from Ukraine's war with Russia.
Poland is taking a step that could radically change the rules of the game in the skies over Eastern Europe.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine is not just the most serious conflict in Europe since World War II. It is a turning point. The previous international order is collapsing before our eyes. The world has entered a new and dangerous era of great power rivalry, rule-breaking, and testing the limits of what is permitted. How far can one go before someone finally says a clear enough, stop? As we continue to talk about peace and security, we are obliged to back up these words with concrete actions.
Warsaw is preparing a law that will give its military the right to shoot down Russian drones and even aircraft over the territory of Ukraine and Belarus without prior consent from NATO or the EU. Until now, Polish military personnel have had to operate within strict limits. The 2022 law required additional approvals not only from the president and government, but also from NATO, the EU, and the country where Polish troops were to operate. This bureaucracy has effectively paralyzed Warsaw's ability to respond quickly to threats. Now, however, the new coalition led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk is proposing a fundamentally different approach. Shoot first, ask questions later. The draft amendments have already been submitted by the Ministry of Defense but will not be considered under an expedited procedure.
This is a significant law that will undoubtedly have a much broader scope of influence, extending far beyond just shooting down drones. Its implications will be felt across various sectors. Just like what we are seeing in Ukraine, this situation will undoubtedly have a much wider and more significant impact than simply moving crews around to retrieve those ships that were once specifically built for us abroad. In other words, we are currently standing on the very threshold of a potentially significant and extensive preparation for the deliberate and careful expansion, so to speak, of the operational scope and practical use of the armed forces well beyond the current geographical boundaries of Ukraine.
Essentially, this is about restoring the Polish army's freedom of action.
Decision-making will be delegated to the executive branch, meaning there will be no need for any parliamentary or democratic procedures. Everything will be handed over to the military. And the military, based on intelligence data, coordination with the Ukrainian side, with NATO, and with anyone else they choose, will make decisions in a closed setting that they deem appropriate from a military standpoint. In other words, the ongoing war is significantly shifting from the public sphere of crucial decisions, which are typically made by democratic bodies, to the more restricted sphere of critical decisions made exclusively by the military. And this clearly shows that the nation of Poland is now much, much closer to an actual war than it was previously before.
This step was a response not only to the increase in Russian aggression, but also to real incidents. In September, for the first time in its history, Poland shot down Russian drones that had crossed into its airspace. Now Warsaw wants to secure the right to act preemptively. Shoot down drones even while they're still over Ukrainian territory. In recent years, Poland has been actively strengthening its eastern border. Along the borders with Russia and Belarus, construction of the fortification line known as the Eastern Shield continues. We're talking about 400 kilometers of defensive fortifications, trenches, concrete tank traps, and engineering barriers. Moscow is responding to this in its usual manner. Putin calls Poland's plans utter nonsense and insists that Russia has no intention of attacking NATO. At the same time, he repeats the claim that it is supposedly the West that is planning aggression against Russia.
Have you completely lost your minds or what? You're as dumb as this table. Who came up with this? It's nonsense. Do you understand?
By the way, von Kearney was saying the same thing back in 2019, 3 years before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Despite all the problems with Ukraine, the speculation around Crimea and Donbass, everyone perfectly understands that Russia is not planning to attack anyone. That's just utter nonsense.
But reality says otherwise. In order not to become yet another victim of aggression and to prevent a repeat of the Ukrainian scenario, Poland is decisively strengthening its defenses, building fortification lines, modernizing its army, and seeking the right to act preemptively in the skies. These steps are not symbolic, but a pragmatic survival strategy in the face of increased Russian aggression. Poland wants to make it clear that it is ready not just to support Ukraine, but together with Ukraine to prevent any further expansion from the Kremlin.
Two NATO countries, Sweden and Finland, are forming a joint brigade of up to 5,000 troops. The units will be deployed in Finnish Lapland, right on the Russian border, according to journalists citing NATO sources. The core of the brigade will be made up of Swedish soldiers from the Norrbotten Army, who are usually trained to fight in harsh and winter conditions. They will be joined by troops from Norway and Denmark, making the brigade predominantly Scandinavian. Swedish howitzers have already been transferred to Lapland. In the event of a conflict, the brigade will be covered by British fighter jets and helicopters. Combat exercises for part of the brigade at the Rovajärvi training ground are set to begin soon. Meanwhile, in Estonia, the transfer of American Abrams tanks has been observed. Columns of heavy equipment are moving closer to the garrison near Russia. All of this is happening against the backdrop of rising tensions with Moscow. During Lavrov's speech at the UN, the hall was half empty. The head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, of course, pretends that everything is fine and continues to recite his propaganda mantras to himself. But the empty seats speak louder than any statements.
At the press
conference following his visit to New York, Lavrov repeated his usual slogans. He insisted that Russia has no intention and never had any intention of attacking NATO or the EU, and that the alliance is allegedly trying to encircle all of Eurasia militarily and, as usual, blames Ukraine for everything.
We absolutely never, under any circumstances, attack civilian targets or non-military objectives. Incidents do happen, but we never deliberately fire at the sky. We never, ever direct our drones or missiles. Regarding the countries located in Europe, both the esteemed EU member states and the nations of the North Atlantic Alliance, once again, if the Poles truly and genuinely wanted to get to the absolute bottom of this complex situation, we immediately proposed a meeting, a direct and open meeting. But regrettably, no one ever truly wants to discuss the undeniable facts, examples where we were unjustly accused. And then it unequivocally turned out that it was, in fact, the Ukrainians who struck, both at the bustling market and at the vulnerable maternity hospital. And unfortunately, there are many, many other similar examples. We know them all very, very well indeed. It's just that when the noise of the initial accusations dies down, later on, journalists, including those who stirred up that noise, don't want to look into these matters. Maybe they're simply not allowed to.
Essentially, it's the same old record that the Kremlin keeps playing, Gadamin. You have to admit, there's nothing new here. In Crimea, car owners are still hunting for gasoline. There's also a new record for fuel prices at gas stations. Wherever gasoline appears, a kilometer-long line instantly forms. Clever gas station owners have come up with a new trick. They split one fuel tanker among 3 or 4 stations to make it seem like there's gasoline everywhere.
Right now there's a line, and the line isn't small. In some places the line stretches for a kilometer. I truly don't know if these challenging situations will stabilize in the near future or not, but as long as the vital oil refineries are significantly hit and consequently not working at their full capacity, and as long as these persistent drones haven't struck even deeper into critical infrastructure, there's still a very considerable risk. So the reality of war is precisely like that. I genuinely don't know when people will fully realize that its devastating impact affects absolutely everyone in
reality, the situation is escalating to the limit. Even among Putin's supporters, real panic is already starting.
I really don't want to leave Trima and Zalozhte. It's so great here, isn't it?
I've gotten used to it.
Here it feels like living in my own home. Everything here feels so wonderfully warm and incredibly homely.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
But today the reality is already different. The economy in the aggressor country is falling apart at the seams, and this is seriously fraying the nerves of both the local residents and the self-proclaimed authorities of temporarily occupied Crimea. Right now, all the details about the situation in Apolostri.
No matter how much they try to prove that everything is under control, reality reminds them of itself in the harshest way. Just imagine, even those in Crimea who until yesterday were staunch supporters of Putin's bloody regime are starting to panic, and it all began with gasoline.
The fact is, part of the plant simply isn't operating physically, which means we're facing problems and disruptions with fuel supply.
Fuel disappeared from the shelves, prices shot up, and sales began to be rationed with coupons. For the residents of the peninsula, this struck at the very heart of their daily lives. When the familiar rhythm collapses, so does the belief in stability. It was gasoline that triggered an entire wave of hysteria. Holy, holy division! Outrage is growing on social media. Users are writing about shortages, about life becoming increasingly difficult, and notably, many of them are former supporters of the authorities, once loud voices in support of Moscow. Now those same voices sound different, filled with anxiety, irritation, and increasingly open disappointment.
Naturally, they are absolutely furious, trying to get their profound outrage across to the very top, saying things like, do something about this situation. They are demanding immediate action. You have to do something. What is the army for? What is the air defense for? Something needs to be done.
Officials are trying to keep the situation under control, turning on the usual pressure mechanisms, propaganda, reassuring statements. But when panic is at the core, even the strongest structures collapse. In the temporarily occupied Crimea, people no longer believe the words about stability. Panic is growing, and with it, distrust toward those who promised order.
I am in direct contact with all the federal services. The situation is objective. I ask Crimeans and guests of the peninsula to be patient. The situation is forced by objective reasons.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian intelligence has gained access to the servers of the Crimean administrations. Hundreds of terabytes of data could reveal management schemes and connections in the occupied territories. This blow coincided with the fuel crisis and intensified the sense that the situation is spiraling out of control. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of serious pressure on the Russian economy, which can no longer withstand its previous burdens.
Due to the fact that since 2022 the Russian Federation has been cut off from international markets, more than 25,000 sanctions have been imposed to date. The only resource the Russian Federation could rely on was its internal reserves, and those have been depleted.
At the everyday level, everyone feels the crisis. Lines for food, disruptions with electricity and water, rising prices, every little thing adds to the sense of instability. The economic downturn within Russia itself makes such forecasts even gloomier.
Today, the Russian Federation is truly in a state of stagnation. And if you take into account that, along with stagnation, it also has a rather high level of inflation, that is rising consumer price indices, then all of this together is called stagflation, which is a very bad thing.
In Crimea today, they are talking about a crisis that they refused to acknowledge just yesterday. It all started with gasoline, with a familiar everyday detail that turned out to be the trigger. It was precisely this that triggered the panic, which is now spreading ever wider. And the question is no longer when the critical point will be reached, but what will happen next once it is crossed.
At the moment, their deficit is 4.5 trillion Russian rubles. In the budget, the planned deficit level was set at 3.8. Russia has developed a hole in its finances, and it's unclear how it will be covered. In other words, Putin will keep fighting until his population starts dying out. According to his own words, he doesn't care.
The Russian billions frozen in Europe are being unfrozen and redirected to benefit Ukraine. The details are in our report.
Kremlin money could become a weapon against itself. For the first time in the 3.5 years of full-scale war, the European Union is preparing to direct frozen Russian assets to support the Ukrainian army. If implemented, this step would be unprecedented in the history of international finance and warfare, turning billions of foreign funds into resources for Ukraine's defense. Until recently, the European Union debated whether these funds could be used without violating international law. But now the situation has changed. For example, Germany used to be one of the main opponents of radical measures.
Previously, Germany was critical of confiscating Russian assets, believing it would lead to numerous negative consequences. Ukraine needs help, but preferably without confiscating these Russian assets.
Now Berlin is changing its position.
Berlin is open to new legally justified plans to use 172 billion euros of frozen Russian funds to support Ukraine's military efforts, which refers to the idea of the European Commission. A high-ranking German official told Politico about this.
The idea is that the funds are transferred to Ukraine and in their place, bonds backed by the European Union are issued. In this way, Brussels hopes to avoid direct accusations of confiscating Russian property. Essentially, the aggressor country's money is being replaced by Europe's IOUs. At the same time, negotiations are underway to provide Ukraine with a so-called reparations loan. Ukraine will only have to repay these funds after Russia pays actual reparations. The final amount of the loan will be determined after the International Monetary Fund assesses Ukraine's financial needs for 2026 and 2027.
Ukraine is set to receive this particular financial instrument, which is widely known and specifically designated as a reparations loan. This is precisely what this significant financial assistance package is officially termed, reflecting its intended purpose and the context of its provision. These particular assets will be specifically Russian assets, which are currently being held in a secure depository in Brussels by various reliable estimates, approximately 270 billion euros, a truly substantial sum. And this is a financial loan that will absolutely have to be fully repaid. And here there are two options, which is why it's called a reparations loan or reparations credit. Either Russia pays reparations to Ukraine after the war ends, as compensation for the damage caused by the war it started, and then this loan will be repaid from those reparations.
If Russia refuses, then the loan will be repaid using the frozen assets.
This is a compromise flexible option. That is precisely why Germany supports it, and in general I believe that today this may be the most realistic option for using frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. This compromise option also suits many European countries, including Germany, because it means they won't have to use their own budget funds to support Ukraine. Because if support for Ukraine is to be increased, and that's exactly what's being discussed now, then where will the money come from? If the money is taken from their own country's budgets, it would either mean a budget deficit and various financial problems, including inflation risks, or they would have to cut spending on other areas, including social programs, which would lead to electoral dissatisfaction. That is why this option of indirect flexible use of Russian assets to support Ukraine is the optimal compromise, which I think will satisfy the majority of European countries at this point.
For now, this is just a proposal that needs to be agreed upon and approved by the European parliaments and, most importantly, by the EU Council, where the principle of consensus applies. And here, problems may arise with our so-called loyal friends, the Slovaks and the Hungarians.
There are two options here. Either apply joint pressure, perhaps with some compromises with Orban, because he also needs money, and sometimes in exchange for certain agreements with the European Commission on subsidies and grants for Hungary, he is willing to compromise. Maybe it will work out the same way here, we'll see. Or it will be necessary to find a solution that allows this scheme to be implemented without relying on the principle of consensus.
And regardless of how things turn out, the discussion about frozen Russian assets is reaching a new level. For the first time, European countries are talking about steps that would allow them to turn the aggressor's money into a resource for Ukraine's defense. If the plan is approved, Kyiv will receive a unique tool for financing military aid without directly burdening European budgets.
And here is yet another proof that Russians are incorrigible, especially when their heads are filled not with common sense, but with the contents of Putin's suitcase. Living in poverty and without medicine, they're ready to blame anyone. Ukrainians, the West, Europe, but not the one who truly stole their old age and their future. Tsar Putin.
Zelensky must be immediately removed.
As for America, if I were in Vladimir Putin's place, there would be absolutely nothing left of the United States by this point in time. Fascists must be killed. You don't negotiate with fascists.
America has been meddling for so many years already. I don't know, if I were in Putin's place, I'd take a bomb and drop it to wipe everyone off the face of the earth.
People had been waiting for our help for 9 years, asking for it, and finally, when it became clear that there was simply genocide happening there, we probably decided to help. And Putin was right when he said that Russian-speaking people were made into enemies, even though we are all Belarusians, Russians. It's a trinity, one people, and Ukraine is ours.
North Korea is in the final stage of developing a missile that can reach the United States. This was stated by the president of South Korea. Our journalists will share all the details.
North Korea is close to creating ballistic missiles capable of striking the United States. According to the South Korean leader, Pyongyang continues to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear weapons and reach American cities.
It seems they haven't succeeded yet, but they are in the final stage. All that's left is the so-called re-entry technology. This will likely be resolved in the near future as well.
On the one hand, there are statements about the possibility, I'll quote, on the one hand, Reuters, citing the president of South Korea, reports that they are entering the final stage of development, meaning just development, while a year ago, South Korean intelligence reported corresponding record-breaking tactical and technical characteristics and tests of the Hwasong-18. All of this creates an element of distrust toward the statements made by South Korean representatives.
Last year, North Korea launched the solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile Hwasong-19, in which military analysts saw many similarities with Russian counterparts. This launch was condemned by the United States, Japan, Ukraine, Canada, and a number of other countries.
The Kinder missile program actually originates from the Russian missile program, meaning that all the developments in the Kinder missile programs, including the operational tactical systems that are currently being supplied for the needs of the armed forces, trace back to Russia. The Russian Federation is referring to the KN-23 as well as intercontinental ballistic missiles. These are the significant developments and innovative creations of skilled Russian engineers, which have already been directly and successfully implemented within the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Pakistan.
Last week, it became known that Russia transferred reactor technologies for nuclear submarines to North Korea. This move was an exchange. Pyongyang supports Moscow on the battlefield in Ukraine by sending troops and ammunition, and in return receives reactors removed from decommissioned Russian submarines. The new president of South Korea announced his intention to improve tense relations with Pyongyang, but his offer of dialogue was rejected by North Korea. Lydia Ment believes that Donald Trump may be the only person capable of becoming a negotiating partner for the DPRK.
South Korea is a strategic partner of the United States, the Non-Aligned Movement, and NATO, and accordingly, such rhetoric is used by South Korea to increase funding for its defense industry and consequently its capabilities to prevent possible armed provocations from the DPRK.
In August, the President of the United States personally expressed his desire to meet with Kim Jong-un.
A spontaneous meeting is also not out of the question, but on the other hand, it should be clearly understood that North Korea is not an independent actor in making such decisions. In fact, North Korea is being used by both the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation to escalate tensions in the Pacific region, which is viewed by the United States as a key area in their foreign policy doctrine.
Earlier, the North Korean dictator stated that he sees no reason to avoid negotiations with the United States, but only if Washington stops insisting on the complete abandonment of his country's nuclear weapons.
It is no coincidence that the statements from the DPRK essentially echo the statements of official representatives of the Russian Federation about the possibility of a preemptive nuclear strike on the territories of NATO countries. Therefore, the rhetoric of the DPRK is an element of military political pressure by the Russian Federation's ally, primarily on South Korea, Japan, and accordingly the potential possibility of its use against the United States as well.
North Korea is actively developing its nuclear program and missile technologies, demonstrating military power in response to international sanctions and political pressure.
How do you like our news? Let us know what we should change to become better. We will definitely take it into account. In the meantime, please like this video to support what we do, and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss future episodes. See you!